But it's wonderful to have you on. Let's go ahead and we'll go and get started here. So, welcome everyone. My name is Jesse Randall. I am the founder of Sweater, and we are the hosts of Founder Saga, where we find ourselves today. Our whole objective in creating Founder Saga was really to be able to generate uh, I guess, a conversation around what it takes to get through the earliest stages of starting a high growth business, or really any business at all. When you have no brand and you have no money, and you're trying to get a product off the ground with a few resources that you have, and the struggle that's really there in order to create something that's great. So the founders that we bring in have made it through that stage and well beyond. And our guest today is Heidi Jannenga, and she has a fantastic story with WebPT. I'm so excited to have you on here with us.
Well, thanks, Jesse. I really appreciate it. It's awesome to see what you've done with Sweater and sharing all these stories. And it's one of the great things I think as you cross the chasm to go back and review some of those things that happened, because it feels like we talk about it like it's happened in dog years. Like it's only been 12 years since we started the company, but it feels like a whole lot longer because of the trials and tribulations that you go through. So I'm always happy to do this, to kind of go back and revisit the quote unquote good times.
Yeah, right. Well, why don't we start with just giving everyone some context for WebPT? You've given the pitch so many times. Give us the quick pitch of what WebPT does today, and kind of an idea of your size and scope, and the people you impact.
Sure. So WebPT is an electronic health record specifically designed for rehab therapists. So that includes PT, OT, and speech therapist. I'm a physical therapist. I'm the co-founder of the company. My co-founder with me was a entrepreneur and a technologist who had built enterprise scale software prior to helping build WebPT. I had been a physical therapist for over 15 years. And so we were solving a problem that was in my industry, which was essentially that the way that we were documenting included transcription and dictation. And that was at a very high cost. And so we would dictate notes that would take about an hour, about a week to get back. So because we would need to send our documentation to physicians. And so using a digital platform to be able to do that improved efficiency and lowered costs, which is exactly what we needed to do since reimbursements were starting to decline overall. And so we basically solved that problem with technology. Originally, the software that we built was only supposed to be for my practice. We did a little market research, and we found that 80% of therapists were also in my same shoes, using pen and paper to document, and transcription and dictation. And so we decided to launch the company in February of 2008. We had one employee at the time. We were literally in the storeroom of a coffee shop in downtown Phoenix. And I guess you fast forward, we sold 5 clinics that first month. And if you fast forward to where we are today in December of 2020, we're $100+ million company. We have a little over 600 employees, 350 of which still are here in Phoenix, in downtown Phoenix. We hold a little over 40% market share within the rehab therapy industry, which equates to about 85,000 users and over 15,000 practices in the greater US that are using our software.
Oh, 40% market share. That is absolutely incredible. Wow,
Yeah,
what an
it's been a
accomplishment.
crazy ride. No, part of that story is that we have gone through 3 rounds of funding. So we did an angel round in 2010, and then a venture capital round in 2014. And then most recently at the end of 2019, we did a private equity round. So we have basically run the entrepreneurial playbook in terms of, what people think as you continue to grow and become a very large scale organization and company.
Yeah, well, you've definitely run the gamut. And I think that, most entrepreneurs, I mean, they get in and they want to have that entire experience that you've had, and build their version of what you've built. So it's so great to be able to hear, to be able to dive into this with you. So let's go back in time a little bit and examine that first idea a little bit more. So
Yeah,
you gave us kind of a brief mention of, the problem that was being faced.
yeah.
So when you first looked at it, I mean, what did you think you were going to build? Like, if you guys sketched this out, I mean, is it anything like it is today, or like what was the first idea really?
Well, what's really interesting is that you talk about back of the napkin. We literally had a back of a ATM envelope. So we had this problem of the transcription and dictation, which is what we needed to solve, and so that was really the documentation component of it. So if you look at sort of what is required from a physical therapist perspective in order to get paid, I see the patient, I have to document all the things that I've done. I create codes for what I've done, and then I send that off to the insurance company with those codes that have a fee schedule attached to that, and then I get paid. It's this pretty long cycle of payment. But it's the documentation portion is the critical component of it, and to put the codes with that. And as we looked at the technology, I was already using a billing software. And so there was already this technology that was being used in private practice to send the codes to the insurance company. It was really that piece before that that was the most cumbersome, that had not been sort of, no technology had tackled that problem yet. And so, or the ones that they did were really just Word documents or something that you could just type into, and it really wasn't either capturing any data or giving you really any efficiencies per se.
Mhm.
And so that's really where we decided that we needed to try something different. That's why we decided to tackle that component of it, because that means that nobody would have to be switching any of their current technology use, if
Mhm.
that makes sense. We went down a path
Yeah.
that essentially was untapped
Mhm.
within the sort of business side of running a PT practice.
So that's awesome that you literally wrote it down on the back of an ATM envelope. That makes me smile.
Well,
Um,
so interestingly, we wrote down a lot of components that we have today, because initially all we started with was the documentation. Today we run everything that has to do with a business, of
mhm.
running a business, from a a PRM or a CRM, sort of a patient retention management platform at the
Mhm.
beginning. So you're attracting patients. We have a scheduler, that you can schedule all your patients on. We have the billing component. So we have a billing software that you can actually interface with insurance companies. We actually have a services side of our business that, does the billing. But if you go all the way back to what was the core, and still is today, the core of what we did was really disrupt how therapists think about documentation and are able to digitize their documentation.
Mhm. That's really a point that I think so many founders need to understand. I mean, maybe this is the wrong assumption, but I imagine that in the position you were in back then, you probably thought you could help with a lot of these things, but you chose to focus on just one,
Yeah.
right? What are your thoughts on that? Like in terms of just being narrow and solving one problem instead of a
It
dozen.
is the biggest problem that I see from entrepreneurs today, as I talk to many of them in our startup community here, is that you try to build the Taj Mahal from the very beginning. And really, all you need is just to satisfy or solve a problem, um, and get a customer base that then over time, as you continue to grow that customer base and the trust within those customers, that you have then the opportunity to add on to your platform and get more wallet share. But initially, the focus should be around market share, right?
Mhm.
And trying to get customers, because customers are your number one area of feedback. That in the beginning, once we, obviously I was a subject matter expert. My clinic was clinic number one as we did our beta prior to launch. So we had gotten feedback not only from myself but from the 10 other therapists that were working with me, and then within 6 months, we had 12 other clinics up and running within the Phoenix area that were also giving us feedback. So that feedback loop with the customer base was really at the beginning what was really driving our roadmap, because you needed to satisfy and get customers feeling like they have value from what you're delivering. Part of the objection initially was from myself. As a founder, and as a physical therapist who was putting a product into my own industry, like I felt a lot of pressure to put out a product that was going to be useful, right? And so, we probably could have launched maybe, I don't know, 3 or 4 months sooner. But, I kind of had that same syndrome where I wanted to make sure it had the bells and whistles that, we needed for me to feel satisfied that people would be able to use this and feel value. And so it was only 3 or 4 months. Sometimes people wait too long, like they wait years. But that sometimes that can be a big objection, is like, oh my gosh, we're not, or you start get you in the narrow focus. We get a lot of accolades today because we stayed so narrowly focused in the rehab therapy world. Initially, after we started and we were having a little bit of success, even in that first year and a half, we had anesthesiologists come to us and say, oh my gosh, this platform could totally work in anesthesiology. Like, you just need to tweak a few things and it'll be perfect for us. And while it was interesting, we had no core competency in anesthesiology. Even if, this one person came on to help us, there was no core competency there. And so we said no. And we stayed very narrowly focused on the rehab therapy industry. But that was a huge objection for a lot of people as we went through that first round of funding, is that your market size was too small. And this was, back in 2008, when niche was not the thing.
Right.
And so people get the niche thing now, obviously, but there's a lot to be said about staying laser focused on a very certain area, a very certain problem that you're solving, and solve it really, really well. It's the whole mile deep, inch wide versus, mile wide, inch deep.
Yeah, you just hit on so many things that I want to dive in on. No, it's great. I mean, this is like the reality of going to market, right? So I think one of the first thing I wanted to dig in on a little bit was you hinted at the feeling you had of being, an industry professional and putting a product out there for your peers and having this desire to have it be good enough. I've run into that a lot, and where it's less to do, that feeling, to me at least, and I'd love to hear more of your thoughts on this. The feeling, to me at least, is that it's less about doing what's right for the customer, and it's more about the facade that you are somehow, projecting yourself into the product and your reputation.
Completely right. That's exactly. It was a reflection on me, is what I thought. And I will also say, though, because I was somewhat well known in the industry from my 15 years of being a sports medicine physical therapist, and had a lot of friends and colleagues that did know me. That was also helpful in them trusting and willing to be those early adopters to the product. So I quickly got over that as positive feedback started coming in, especially from those that I respected. In most industries, but I feel like in healthcare, and I know for sure in our industry, is that people just want to help. If they like your product and they see potential in it, they're willing to help, right? So we got so many therapists in the beginning to, help share some of the workflows and things that weren't working for them that we could slightly tweak. But you are right. Sometimes you can get too caught up in trying to make everyone happy. We definitely abided by the 80-20 rule, where as long as 80% of people are happy, you're always going to have naysayers. You're always going to have people that it just doesn't work for. But if you can satisfy 80% of your customer base, you're doing pretty darn good.
Yeah, that's awesome. And that right there is an entirely different topic, right? Because it seems like that negative feedback that comes in is so much louder than all the positive stuff that you're doing right. And you just, I think it's human nature to just focus in on it, and you take it personally, in many ways, being
Yeah.
like, I'm not, we missed the mark. We've got to focus on this thing when it might only be, like even 1 out of 20 people that even mention it, right?
Yeah. Well, and you touched on an interesting thing that have not really thought about, and that's just culture of a company is starting at that very beginning, whether you know it or don't know it. And sort of that service element and customer focus is part of our culture today, stronger than ever. Creating raving fans is one of our top core values. And that started from that feedback loop when we began the company, right? Of building relationships and understanding that we were going to be a product that was going to be required to run a business. And if we didn't get it right, people wouldn't stick around. Um, and so it's sort of that beginning phases that starts to build a reputation. It starts to build your brand. It starts to build a lot of things in how you treat people, how well you are listening. And so as you start to then continue, and that word of mouth in the beginning is so critical for a small business, especially in a smaller niche. I always laugh because it's a $6 billion market. I mean, I don't know. That doesn't seem small to me.
Right. Well, I'm sure that they hammered you on it, though. I mean, I can just imagine them saying, like sitting in the investor's chair and saying, well, it's a $6 billion overall industry, but how big is the software service part of that industry? It's just too small, Heidi. I don't think that we can support this thesis you have. I mean, I
Right.
can
And that's
just hear
at
hear them.
100% of market share, right? You got to get to, a lot of market share before that even is meaningful. Well, look at where we are today.
Yeah. I love that. You can kind of push it back on.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to go in on saying no to people. You know, I think that it's. I mean, okay, I've felt, call it borderline desperation before, right? Where you're in a position that, yeah, you have customers, you might be growing, whatever, but you're probably still not paying all the bills quite right. You see all these different things happening, that if something went sideways, that you could be toast. And so when an opportunity for revenue is looking you in the face and saying, like you said about the anesthesiologists, right? There's an opportunity here. Come help me too. That is an incredibly hard thing to say no to. So it sounds, I mean, the way you said it made it sound like that wasn't that hard of a decision. So, I mean, from your perspective, like when you really had that opportunity, what was that decision-making process you went through to be firm and say, no, we're not going to do that?
Well, so again, it goes back to the discipline of the problem you're trying to solve. And we had clearly defined the problem within PT, right? And while we understood that the potential to build a platform company that could be replicated in other adjacent markets was the possibility, today we had a huge runway and greenfield opportunity in front of us that we hadn't even tapped into yet. We hadn't even proven ourselves in our own market to try to go into a different market. And we had started developing some traction and sales within PT, but we hadn't exploded yet. The hockey stick was only starting to begin. And so it was really a discipline. And I want to say that people always say, picking your co-founder or your first executive team, your leadership team in the beginning is so critical. And I can't emphasize that enough. To not, especially if you're a sole founder, a single founder, is to not surround yourself with just exactly like-minded people. Let people think like you. My co-founder and I, very different in terms of how we see the world. Um, and that diversity between us as co-founders of a company were extremely helpful, and I think so much a part of our success. And then you add on the layers of others that we brought on, and it was somewhat subconscious back then. We didn't really necessarily seek out until we hired a few higher level executives to think about that diversity. Like, what were the skill sets that we were really good at? We didn't need to bring more people on that were like us and had that same skill set. We needed to find the weaknesses within ourselves and then hire people that were good in that area. Mm-hmm. And we did do that intentionally. As, like, for example, our very first hire was a sales representative, because neither one of us really thought about ourselves or had never done sales in our previous lives before we founded this company. And so we needed someone who had a sales mindset, had done sales in the past, had built pipelines and all the things that you need from a sales perspective, while my co-founder held down the tech side and I held down more of the operations. So that third person was really the one that helped us build out our sales team and sort of sales strategy, if you will, in the very beginning.
Mm-hmm. And your objective with them, I'm sure, when you sat them down and said, you need to help us build this, you gave them that narrow mindset, right? And said, this is what we're sticking to.
Oh, yeah.
Don't get distracted by shiny stuff over here.
Well, and that's where your vision comes in, right? The vision of who you have to be able to articulate that really well, in my opinion, as a fledgling company. Our very first employee did not get paid for the first 3 months until we launched the company. We did offer, some equity in the company, but he didn't get paid until he started making sales, and we couldn't make sales until we, had all our ducks in a row as an organization and a company. But he believed in the vision. He saw the opportunity of what we had put on the back of that ATM envelope, and believed, and it had an entrepreneurial mindset. And so when he jumped on board, it's really important that you have a vision, and our vision was very narrowly focused in the rehab therapy market.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. So why don't we talk for a minute about the main topic that we, decided on beforehand, which was really, talking about people that told you couldn't do it, right? Or that otherwise giving you pushback. So I don't know your story on this. I've heard much of your story in other areas, but on this topic in particular, tell me more about this. I don't think that I know the story, and, so who was giving you pushback, and at what stage of the business, did you feel like, you were having people tell you, maybe you should think about this twice?
Well, the first person that was questioning whether or not we should do this or could do this was my own inner thoughts. The Heidi Jannenga and technology were not used in the same sentence when we first started this company. And so, I had built a 15 plus year career as a physical therapist. I was at the top of my game. I was a clinic director of one of the largest sports medicine practices in the country. I was working with professional athletes. We had started 2 clinics inside of ASU. Like, you check the box on every goal that I had set for myself in terms of being a PT and in sports. I was on my way to checking every single one of those boxes. And so to jump into something that was completely foreign, even though it was solving a problem that I was having, was so difficult in the beginning. And I didn't, because I wasn't truly connected and felt comfortable with technology, I didn't truly believe that technology was going to solve the problem. And I had no idea at the time that this was my problems were ubiquitous with the entire industry. I just thought it was a problem I was having, right? And so, all the initial, oh, this is just for us. Like, thank you. This is really nice of you as my co-founder happened to be my boyfriend at the time. That's really cool that you want to do this for me at the clinic. Thank you for helping me solve my problem. But when we started down the path of, finding out that 80% of the market was available, to having my peers that I respected come back to me and say, this is really freaking cool. Like, you developed something, you need to go for this, was that sort of nudge that I needed to open my mind to something bigger and different than what I had originally thought my path as a human being was going to be. And so those initial naysayers were me right here in my
head. I did not see that coming. but I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, you look back on your experience and where you are today. I mean, you built a $100 million company, 40% market share, all this stuff. But on day one or day 100 or whatever, you don't know that. You have no idea what's coming.
And we were going to go. We were going to go into debt. I'm not comfortable with debt as a person, as I lead my life. I'm not a debt person. $100 million, or I grew up in a very low to moderate income family. So, and when I thought of the word entrepreneur, you think of you either think of, Steve Jobs or some, crazy giant company, or you think about this. At least is what I do. Think about the sleazy guy at the bar who says, I'm an entrepreneur, which is essentially means I don't have a job, but I'm trying to build something. And so, and then this is like another topic, I'm sure, but just even as being a woman and a female, like there was nobody that I could say, wow, I can look up to somebody and say, oh my gosh, look what they've accomplished. Oh, for sure, this is something I can do too, especially in the technology world. And so there's a lot of hesitation initially. The whole imposter syndrome issue of, can I really do this? They're going to see right through me that I have no idea what I'm talking about when I talk about technology, as a physical therapist, right?
Yeah. Oh, I mean, you're bringing in so many good things here. So I would guess, looking at the founders that I know, at least half were not technologists, or even in the industry at all when they started their companies. So I'd like you to tell our audience more about that feeling you had. Looking at it and just saying, technology is so foreign. I have this need and this pain, but I don't know anything. Like, there's no role model to look to. There's no nothing. I mean, I guess what advice would you give to founders who are finding themselves in that situation with that same mentality? How do you get through it?
Well, what really helped me is that I really understood the problem. I could explain the problem, and I had some solutions in my head. Like I had seen, or I was looking for solutions, and I had seen some of our referring physicians who had started down this path of using electronic medical records in their areas. And I went into my industry and I found there was a couple of, systems that had been started, but they were all server-based and super clunky and expensive. And I couldn't even afford it with the size of my practice. And so I really understood the problem. And so when I was able to talk to someone who could see the problem from a completely different lens of, solving it from a technology perspective, there were ways in which, as we discussed a solution, because I was so well versed in the actual problem, that it was much easier to find solutions to it. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Because if I only cursorily understand the problem, and this is also, I think, a lot of why we're successful, is because someone in our organization, which was me as a founder, but doesn't have to always be the founder, there is a subject matter expert who is very well versed in that industry. It's really difficult for entrepreneurs to come in and solve a problem that is completely foreign to them, that they pick it out of a hat and say, "Ooh, I want to go solve that problem," without fully immersing themselves into that industry, that whatever it is. Because if you do get sold out for not really understanding and potentially going down paths that don't work, because you don't know your audience, you don't know the customer base as well as you probably should. And so, I think that was part of what helped me get out of that. But I'm a lifelong learner. Like I love when I find something that I don't know about, I go look it up, and I like to read about it and figure it out. And so that's exactly what I did. I actually became a certified product manager. So I went down the product side, because that's essentially what I was doing, was creating the requirements for then our tech folks to build. But it was incumbent on me to figure out, I knew the workflow, right? I knew what I needed it to do. It was really, how do I build those requirements in a way that made sense to programmers? And so I went and got my certification and started learning more and more about the technology side, to where I felt much more comfortable, and I knew a little bit, enough to be dangerous in terms of in terms of that side of the house.
Yeah. So what stage of the business did you do that? Did you take
very
that?
Beginning.
Oh, wow.
Within the first couple of years. Yeah.
I think that's a great pro tip for anyone that's, looking at this and saying, I'm an outsider. I mean, you took steps beyond just starting the company to really get yourself to where you felt comfortable with it. I think that's great. It seems to be part of your nature, right? Is to
learn,
push
and
yourself down there.
Yeah. And to go down those paths. And then the other thing I'll say, Jesse, is, and I think my co-founder really helped to us to really understand this as we started the company, especially, being in a relationship, we had to sort of draw lines in the sand of, okay, this is your domain, this is my domain. And because we had such different sort of areas that we only overlapped were, let's say some parts of the operations of the company, but we really owned two different segments in the business. And so there had to be a lot of trust, in which we still collaborated on ideas and solutions, but then when it came to execution, you had your domain to just go carte blanche and do your thing, right? And so as we drew those sort of lines, it was important for us to understand, our fears and our risk levels, because they were very, very different. And so, for example, like because of the financial, and I didn't want to go into debt, like I took on the responsibility, because it was my risk adverseness that was being affected, is I kept working full-time as a physical therapist up until we took that first round of funding in 2010. So essentially I was working full-time, 2 full-time jobs, but that was going to make me feel more comfortable. Right. Yeah. And I couldn't hold it against him that, even though he was working full time in our business and working, 80 hours a week, doing that, like I couldn't hold it against him that he wasn't also working a second job. Right. And so it's just understanding some of those things about yourself and solving them and being okay with that. I think it's also really important in the beginning to really know who you are, what your strengths are, and feeling comfortable in your own shoes.
And it sounds like also being able to communicate with the person that you create the company with, right?
Right.
That can create a lot of conflict if you can't articulate those elements too.
Right.
Well, you brought up one other thing that, I know a lot of people it's a hotter topic today, which is, being a female founder in a predominantly male dominated world. I mean, looking way back in 2008, I mean, even more so, right? I mean, there wasn't even a conversation happening.
Yeah.
So, in looking at that, I guess we looked at it through two lenses, looking at today and looking at it back when you started the company. I mean, I guess what advice would you give to other women that want to found companies in this world? What's going to help them be more successful?
Well, first of all, start it, do it. Don't let anybody tell you that you can't. Don't let yourself tell you that you can't, because there are so many amazing companies out there today that have been started by women. And the other piece I would say is there are certain expectations, and sometimes, and it's unfortunate that it's this way, but it seems like even today when I hear people pitch, there's still definitely bias out there. And so really knowing your business, um, understanding, the business side, have the metrics dialed in, like all the things that, like everyone should be expected to do. This isn't just women.
Mm-hmm.
But there's definitely still bias when it comes to, funding and all of that. And
Mm-hmm.
so those that really have command of the metrics in the business are going to get noticed more. And so even though it sucks that you have to say that, it's I've seen it over and over again. And so having that ability to whether it's sharing that responsibility with someone, but truly being able to tell the story and the numbers and the business side behind it, it is really, really critical. We got a lot
Absolutely.
we got a lot of resistance, because my co-founder eventually became my husband. And, we got a lot of resistance in the beginning because we were a husband and wife team. And, and most of the fears from funders are because, and not so much on the women's side, but from a husband and wife or even co-founders, they'll dive into that relationship pretty deeply when you have, two or more co-founders, because, a lot of the fears come from seeing companies that have been very disrupted because those relationships go south. And so just making sure that you've got the right founder, right? But also, again, there's lots of legal ways to make sure you've got those things all carved out in a way that becomes more equitable and relieves some of the stress that funders might have with that.
Yeah, that's really good advice. I've interviewed a couple of couples that have started their businesses, and you're right. I mean, I think that there's an inherent bias just for that, right? Regardless of who you are. Yep. I mean, whatever that is. So for the female founders that are navigating, and there are biases out there, especially in the fundraising process, when someone encounters that, what's your advice for dealing with it? Is it just something that you just have to absorb and just move on, or is there something else to do?
Well, it depends on the level. Any funder is going to be a partner to the business. So if there is not clear, good relationship building that's happening, then, even though they may be a check writer, it's probably not going to be the right relationship down the road if there's not that inherent trust and support that is needed by any founder or any entrepreneur, regardless of who you are. And so, there's a certain level a thick skin that you have to have to because of some of those inherent biases that are there. But for the most part, when you stumble on the right partner from a funding perspective, you're going to know, and that level of that animosity or bias will not be seen. It'll be somebody you feel very comfortable with from the beginning. So
that's really good. Yeah, I guess in many ways, right? Not every way, but in many ways, it's the same. It's a similar problem with a different cloak over it, and that you need to find the right people to be a partner in your business.
Yeah.
And And ultimately, you don't want someone that is sitting there with some inherent bias against you.
No, and too often it's that desperation that you were talking about earlier, right? That you feel like, oh my gosh, I have a bird in hand, I better take it. And it can destroy a company if you don't have the right partnership within, even just your executive or leadership team, but for sure with whoever you choose as a funder, or a financial partner, because you know um, that can just become a very tenuous situation that just
Mhm.
is too much of your brain that you shouldn't have to worry about. You have so much to deal with as a leader of your growing company that you just don't want to have to expend any brain cycles on emotional nonsense that is not additive to the company.
Mhm. That's really good advice. Thanks for diving in on that. Well, we're about the end of our time. I wanted to turn the last few minutes to you, and knowing who our audience is, what advice would you give someone that is either in the beginning, the early stages of their company, and in the trenches, or those that are thinking about doing it? What would you want them to know based on your experiences?
Um, well, I think first and foremost, it's about challenging the status quo, right? That, most entrepreneurs don't have success in doing what everybody else has already done. Like you got to figure out a new mousetrap, essentially.
Mm.
Um, but most importantly, it's about being a problem solver. We solved a problem that I was having in my practice that has now grown to $100 million business. You will find more problems as you dive into whatever industry you have. It's not it, it's an initial problem, staying narrowly focused on solving that one, and then more problems will spring from there that you have the ability to solve. And so, entrepreneurs are problem solvers, and successful ones solve problems really, really well in a non-status quo way. And
Mhm.
so, and that even speaks to being a female founder, right? There's so many things I'd love to. In my learnings, it's hard to put it in just one thing. It's the diverse people around you, right? The diverse thoughts. We call it cognitive diversity, that you surround yourself with, so that you just don't have all these yes people around you, that you truly have people that are willing to call you on your bullshit. It's so critically important, to have that 360 view as you're making decisions for the business. Um, so especially in those early years.
Mhm. Cognitive diversity. I love that. I think in general, we all need to surround ourselves with more people like that, but especially inside your company. I love it. Uh, Heidi, thank you so much for spending time with us today. I love hearing your story. You've built an incredible company, and you've impacted people all around the world. I was going to say at the beginning, I forgot. I went to PT for the first time like 2 months ago, and guess what software they were using?
Yay,
Right there.
WebPT. Nice.
It was right there. So, well, anyway, thank you again, and we're very pleased to have you on here. Thanks everyone for coming, and for those that are here, we have two more interviews today, with Greg Scoresby from Campus Logic, and Johnny Hanna and Mike Peregrino from Homey are also on today. So, thank you so much, everyone, and we appreciate you being here, Heidi. You're the best.
Thank you, Jesse. And if anybody wants to get in touch with me, I'm on LinkedIn. Be happy to answer any more questions or keep the conversation going.
Fantastic. Thank you.